He shoved his pregnant ex off her chair, and he had no idea that the woman crashing to the floor in front of him was married to the most feared man in the entire Korean underworld. The sound of the chair clattering against the tile echoed through the small diner like a gunshot. Maya Bennett hit the ground hard, one hand instinctively wrapping around her stomach, the other bracing against the cold floor. For a second, the whole diner went silent. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned toward the man standing over her, chest heaving, fists still clenched from the push. His name was Derek Coleman, and in about 11 minutes, his entire life was going to fall apart, though he didn't know it yet. Before we get into how a simple shove turned into the worst decision of Derek's life, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story has twists you will not see coming. If you're new here, welcome. We tell real, raw, satisfying stories every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. 3 months earlier, Maya's life looked nothing like this. She lived in a quiet brownstone on the edge of the city, the kind of place with warm lighting in the windows and a doorman who knew her by name. She drove a car most people only saw in magazines. She wore clothes that whispered money instead of shouting it. And most importantly, she wore a wedding ring that very few people had ever seen up close, because Maya Bennett, now Maya Choi, had built a wall around her old life so high that almost nobody from her past could see over it. Almost nobody, except Derek. Derek had known Maya for 6 years. They dated for 3 of them, back when Maya was scraping by on a barista's salary, and Derek was convinced he was destined for something bigger than the 2 dead-end jobs he cycled through. Back then, Maya believed in him. She covered rent more months than she'd like to admit. She listened to his big plans about opening a restaurant, a clothing line, a tech startup, plans that changed every few months depending on what documentary he'd watched last. And when she got pregnant the first time, 3 years into their relationship, Derek didn't believe in anything at all. He told her it wasn't the right time. He told her he wasn't ready. And 2 weeks after she lost that pregnancy to a miscarriage that nearly killed her, alone in a hospital room because Derek was handling some things, he left her for a woman with a trust fund and 0 interest in Derek's grand ambitions. Maya rebuilt herself from nothing. That's the part of the story most people don't know. They only see the ending, the money, the ring, the security. They don't see the 18-hour days she worked at 3 different jobs. They don't see the nights she cried herself to sleep in a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor. They don't see the moment she almost gave up entirely. They don't see how she met Kang Jinho. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a fairy tale. Maya was working as an event coordinator for a private function at a hotel, the kind of event where the guest list is confidential and the security detail outnumbers the waitstaff 2 to 1. Jinho noticed her not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because when a drunk guest grabbed her wrist too hard, she didn't flinch, didn't panic. She simply looked him dead in the eye and said, "Let go of me, or I will make sure you never work in this city again." And then she smiled like she meant every word. Jinho liked people who didn't scare easily. In his world, fear was currency, and Maya had none to spend. They talked. Not that night, not the next, but over months, carefully, cautiously. Maya didn't know at first what Jinho really was. She thought he ran a shipping company, which technically wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth either. By the time she learned who he truly was, the man behind one of the most powerful criminal organizations moving through the Pacific Corridor, a man whose name made grown men go pale in restaurants, she was already in love with him. She had a choice to make, and she made it. "You understand what you're choosing," Jinho had told her, the night he finally laid everything bare. They sat in his penthouse, the city lights spread out beneath them like scattered stars. "This isn't a life you can walk away from once you're in it. There are things I cannot protect you from completely. There are enemies who would use you against me if they could." Maya had looked at him for a long time before she answered. "I've spent my whole life being underestimated by people who thought they knew what I could survive. You're not the scariest thing I've ever dealt with." Jinho married her 4 months later. Small ceremony. No pictures released. No public record beyond what absolutely had to exist. Maya Bennett became Maya Choi in every way that mattered, and the woman who once counted coins for bus fare now had access to more resources than most small nations. And she was 3 months pregnant with their first child. That morning, the morning everything happened, Maya wasn't thinking about any of that. She was just craving pancakes. A stupid, simple craving, the kind pregnant women get that makes no logical sense but demands to be satisfied immediately. Jinho was in meetings all day, his security detail tied up with him, and Maya, stubborn as ever, decided she didn't need an escort to go get pancakes 3 blocks from her old neighborhood, at a diner she used to frequent back when she had nothing. She should have called ahead. She should have taken a driver. But some habits from her old independent life were hard to shake, and honestly, she just wanted 5 minutes of feeling normal. She got a lot more than 5 minutes. Derek was at the counter when she walked in, nursing a coffee he couldn't really afford, staring at his phone with the particular scowl of a man whose life had not gone according to plan. He looked up when the bell over the door chimed, and for a moment, Maya considered turning right around and walking back out. Too late, he'd already seen her. Maya, his voice cracked slightly with disbelief. Holy Maya Bennett. She kept her face neutral, the way she'd trained herself to over the last 2 years. Calm, unreadable. It's Choi now, she said simply, moving toward a booth in the back. Choi, Derek slid off his stool, following her before she'd even sat down. You got married. When? To who? Derek, I'm just here to eat, please. But Derek wasn't the kind of man who understood the word please as a boundary. He never had been. He slid into the booth across from her uninvited, eyes doing a slow scan, the ring on her finger, the visible swell of her stomach beneath her coat, the quality of the coat itself. You're pregnant. His voice had an edge now, something dark curling underneath the shock. Your weight, how far along? That's not your business. It could be. The words came out low, almost a growl. How long ago did we, Maya? You can't just... Derek, Maya's voice sharpened, patience already thinning. We broke up 2 years ago. I have been remarried for over a year. This baby is my husband's. Please, for both our sakes, walk away. Something shifted in Derek's face. It was the look of a man doing math he desperately wanted to come out differently. He'd spent 2 years watching his life crumble. The trust fund girlfriend had left him within 8 months, once she realized he had no actual ambition, just talk. He'd bounced between jobs, between apartments, between excuses. And now here was Maya, the woman he'd discarded like she was nothing, sitting in front of him wearing clothes that cost more than his monthly rent, glowing with a kind of stability he could only dream about. The jealousy hit him like acid. You think you're better than me now. His voice rose, drawing looks from nearby tables. You think some ring makes you untouchable. I remember when you were nothing, Maya. I remember when you were begging me to stay. Never begged you for anything. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a protective gesture she wasn't even fully aware of. Derek, lower your voice. What? He leaned forward, and something ugly was building behind his eyes now, years of resentment finally finding a target. Who's gonna stop me? Your mystery husband who can't even be bothered to walk you into a diner. Derek, you need to leave. Right now. Make me. The words came out with a sneer, and before Maya could react, before the 2 waitresses near the counter could even process what was happening, Derek's hand shot out and shoved her hard, square in the shoulder. Maya, off balance in the way pregnant women often are, went down fast. The chair toppled with her, her hip and shoulder taking the brunt of the impact against the tile, a sharp gasp tearing out of her as pain lit up her side. The diner erupted into chaos. Oh my God, she's pregnant. Someone call an ambulance. What is wrong with you? Derek stood frozen for half a second, the reality of what he'd just done crashing over him in a wave of ice water. He hadn't meant, he didn't think, his hands had just moved on their own, driven by 2 years of bitterness finally boiling over. Maya, I didn't mean to. Get away from me. Maya's voice shook, but it wasn't fear driving it. It was rage, pure, controlled rage. A waitress and another customer helped her up carefully, checking if she was hurt, if the baby was okay, while Maya kept one hand pressed to her stomach, breathing through what might have been a contraction or might have just been panic, she couldn't tell yet, and that terrified her more than anything Derek could ever do to her. Someone needs to call the police, an older woman near the window said, already dialing. No. Maya's voice cut through the diner, sharp and sudden. Everyone turned to look at her. No police. Derek actually looked relieved for a fraction of a second, right before Maya pulled out her phone with hands that were shaking, but not from fear. She dialed a single number. It rang once. "Me a car to 5th and Monroe. Now." Her voice was ice. "And get me Sang-hoon." She hung up before whoever was on the other end could even respond. Derek's stomach dropped, though he still had no idea why. Something about the way she said that name, Sang-hoon, sent a chill through the diner that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Who was that?" he asked, and for the first time, real fear was creeping into his voice. "Maya, who did you just call?" Maya didn't answer him. She was staring out the window, one hand still on her belly, watching the street with an expression Derek had never seen on her before, not in 6 years of knowing her. It wasn't panic. It wasn't sadness. It was the calm certainty of someone who knew, without a shadow of doubt, that consequences were already in motion, and there was absolutely nothing anyone in that diner could do to stop them. That's when the black SUVs pulled up outside, 3 of them. Windows tinted so dark they looked almost solid. They didn't park so much as they surrounded the front of the diner, boxing in the exits with a precision that told everyone watching this wasn't the first time these vehicles had done this. The doors opened in perfect unison. "Before we go further, I want to ask, if you were in Maya's position, would you have called the police, or would you have handled it your own way? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story has already got your heart racing, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Now, back to the diner, because Derek is about to find out exactly who he messed with. 4 men stepped out of the SUVs. They wore dark suits, tailored perfectly, the kind of clothing that somehow made them look even more dangerous than if they'd been dressed in tactical gear. They moved like a single organism, fanning out with practiced efficiency, 2 of them stationed at the door, 2 more walking directly into the diner. The diner had gone completely silent now. Even the cook had stopped at the window between the kitchen and counter, spatula frozen midair. The man in front, tall, sharp-jawed, with a scar along his left eyebrow that suggested a history far more violent than his composed exterior let on, walked straight to Maya's booth. His eyes flicked over her once, assessing, before he spoke in accented but perfectly clear English. "Mrs. Choi, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Sang-hoon. Maya's voice had steadied now, cold and controlled. "Shaken. The baby, I don't know yet. We need to get to a hospital to check. The car is ready." Sang-hoon's eyes moved to Derek, and something in his expression made Derek's blood run cold. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was worse than anger. It was the flat, assessing look of a man cataloging a problem that needed to be solved. "This is him?" Sang-hoon asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes." Derek found his voice, though it came out thinner than he wanted. "Look, man, I don't know what's going on here, but this doesn't need to escalate. It was a misunderstanding. We had an argument. You put your hands on a pregnant woman." Sang-hoon's voice was quiet, and somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "In front of witnesses. I barely touched her, Derek." Maya's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. "Stop talking. You are making this so much worse for yourself." "Worse how?" Derek's composure was cracking now, panic bleeding through. "Maya, what is this? Who are these people?" "You should have asked that question," Sang-hoon said, stepping closer, "before you decided to raise your hand to Mr. Choi's wife." Name landed in the diner like a dropped glass. A few of the regulars, older folks who'd lived in this part of the city long enough, who read the papers, who'd heard whispers over decades, visibly stiffened. One man near the counter actually got up and quietly slipped out the side door, not wanting to be anywhere near whatever was about to happen. Derek, city blind to the name, still didn't understand. "Choi? Who's Choi?" Maya finally stood, one hand supported by Sang-hoon, the other cradling her stomach protectively. She turned to face Derek fully for the first time since the shove, and there was something almost pitying in her expression now, pity for a man who was about to learn, in the worst possible way, exactly how badly he'd misjudged the situation. "My husband," she said quietly, "is Kang Jinho." Silence that followed was absolute. Even Derek, who had no idea who that was, could feel the weight the name carried in the room, the way Sang-hoon's jaw tightened, the way one of the men by the door reflexively touched the inside of his jacket, the way the entire energy of the diner had shifted into something suffocating. Who is that?" Derek asked, voice barely above a whisper now. Sang-hoon's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. "You're about to find out." Before Derek could respond, sirens wailed in the distance, but not police sirens. An ambulance, called by one of the diner staff before Maya had told them not to, arrived to check on her. Sang-hoon insisted on the paramedics examining her right there before anything else happened, his priorities crystal clear. Maya and the baby first, everything else second. As the paramedics worked, checking Maya's vitals, monitoring for any signs of distress from the fall, Derek stood frozen near the booth, flanked now by two men who hadn't said a single word to him but whose presence alone made escape feel impossible. He thought about running. He glanced at the door once, calculating, and one of the men, without even looking directly at him, shifted his weight just enough to make clear that running would not go well. "Vitals are stable," one paramedic finally said. "Blood pressure's a little elevated, which is understandable given the fall, but I'm not seeing signs of active labor or serious injury. I'd still recommend a full evaluation at the hospital, just to be safe, especially given the pregnancy." "Her now," Sang-hoon said. "I'll handle things here." Maya paused before she let the paramedics lead her to the ambulance, turning back one final time to look at Derek. There was no triumph in her expression, no cruelty. Just a tired, weary finality, like she was closing a book she'd never wanted to open in the first place. "You should have just let me eat my pancakes, Derek," she said quietly. Then she was gone, out the door into the ambulance, the doors closing behind her. Derek turned to Sang-hoon, sweat beading on his forehead despite the diner's air conditioning. "Look, man, whatever this is, whoever your boss is, I'm sorry, okay?" "I panicked. I wasn't thinking. I would never actually hurt her. You already hurt her." Sang-hoon's voice was flat. "The question now is what happens to you because of it." "You going to kill me?" Derek's voice cracked on the question, all bravado completely gone now, replaced by raw animal fear. Sang-hoon studied him for a long moment, long enough that Derek's legs nearly gave out beneath him. "That," Sang-hoon finally said, "is not my decision to make." Two of the men flanked Derek, and with a gentleness that somehow felt more menacing than force would have, guided him toward the door and into one of the black SUVs. Derek didn't resist. He couldn't. His body had gone numb with terror, his mind spinning through every possible outcome, none of them good. As the SUV pulled away from the diner, leaving the stunned staff and remaining customers to process what they'd just witnessed, Derek stared out the tinted window at the city passing by. And for the first time in his life, he understood with complete and total clarity that he had made a mistake that money, apologies, or time could not fix. He had no idea just how right he was. We're just getting started, and things are about to get a whole lot darker. But before that, if you've made it this far, you're clearly invested, so do me a favor and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps this channel keep telling stories like this one, uncut and unfiltered. All right, let's find out what Kang Jinho does when he learns what happened to his wife. Kang Jinho was in a meeting when Sang-hoon's call came through, a meeting with representatives from a shipping consortium, the kind of legitimate-facing business that laundered as much money as it moved cargo. He rarely allowed interruptions during these meetings. Everyone in the room knew that, so when his phone buzzed against the table and he glanced down to see Sang-hoon's name, every person at that table felt the temperature in the room drop. Jinho answered without a word, listening. His face, normally composed to the point of unreadability, a mask he'd perfected over 2 decades of surviving in a world that punished weakness instantly and permanently, didn't change. Not visibly. But those who knew him, who had spent years learning to read the almost imperceptible shifts in his posture, would have noticed his shoulders tighten by exactly 1 degree. His fingers, resting on the table, curled slightly. "Where is she now?" he said. Not a question. A demand delivered in a voice so calm it was almost worse than shouting. He listened again. "And the man," another pause. "Bring him to the warehouse on Delacroix. I want him there before I arrive." He ended the call without another word, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket, and turned to the 4 men still seated at the table, their expressions carefully neutral, though every single one of them understood exactly what kind of call that had been. "We'll continue this discussion another time," Jinho said, his voice returning to its usual measured smoothness, though nobody in that room mistook it for calm. "My apologies for the interruption." He left without another word, and the 4 businessmen exchanged glances once the door closed, none of them daring to speak until they were absolutely certain he was gone. In the car, Jinho allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to feel something before he locked it away entirely. 30 seconds of pure, incandescent fury at the thought of anyone laying a hand on Maya, at the thought of his unborn child potentially in danger, at the helplessness of being in a meeting 3 miles away while it happened. 30 seconds. Then he breathed out slowly, and when he opened his eyes again, that fury had transformed into something colder, more controlled, and infinitely more dangerous. He called the hospital first. "This is Kang Jinho," he said when the line connected. "My wife, Maya Choi, was brought in approximately 20 minutes ago. I want a full report, and I want the best obstetrician in that building in her room within the next 10 minutes. Scramble on the other end was audible even through the phone. By the time Jinho arrived at the hospital, striding through the corridors with an entourage that made hospital staff instinctively step aside, Maya was already in a private room, hooked up to a fetal monitor, the steady rhythmic sound of a heartbeat filling the space. Jinho stopped in the doorway for just a moment, taking in the sight of her, pale, exhausted, a bruise already forming along her shoulder, before he crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hand. "I'm okay," Maya said immediately, reading the storm behind his eyes. "We're okay. The baby's heartbeat is strong. They checked twice." "I know," Jinho said quietly. "I spoke to the doctor before I came in." His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles, and for just a moment the mask slipped entirely, revealing raw fear underneath the control. "I should have sent someone with you. This isn't your fault." "It is." His jaw tightened. "I let you believe you could move through the world like anyone else. You can't." "Not anymore, not as my wife." Maya's expression softened, but there was steel underneath it, too. "Don't do that. Don't make this about what I can and can't do. Derek did this, nobody else." Jinho was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still tracing slow circles against her hand. "Tell me exactly what happened, everything." Maya told him. All of it, the argument, the accusations, the shove, the fall. She watched his face carefully as she spoke, watched the muscle in his jaw tighten with every detail, watched his eyes go from concern to something flatter, something more distant and dangerous. When she finished, Jinho was quiet for a long time. "He's being brought to the Delacroix warehouse," he finally said. "Jinho." Maya's voice carried a warning. "I haven't decided anything yet." His voice was still level, controlled. "I want to see him. I want to understand exactly what kind of man would do this." "I know what kind of man he is," Maya said quietly. "I dated him for 3 years. He's weak, Jinho. He's petty and jealous and small, and he's never in his life taken responsibility for anything. Don't waste your energy on him." "Put his hands on you." Jinho's voice finally cracked slightly, the first real fissure in his composure since he'd walked into the room. "He could have hurt the baby. He could have hurt you seriously, Maya. Don't ask me to just let that go." Maya squeezed his hand. "I'm not asking you to let it go. I'm asking you not to become someone I won't recognize because of him. He's not worth that." Jinho leaned down and pressed his forehead gently against hers, breathing in the moment of quiet between them, the steady beeping of the fetal monitor, a strange kind of comfort in the background. "I need to go deal with this," he finally murmured. "I promise you I will not do anything that would change how you see me, but he needs to understand completely and permanently what he's done. There has to be a reckoning, Maya, for our child's sake, if nothing else. Men like Derek only understand consequence." Maya searched his eyes for a long moment before she nodded slowly. "Then let me tell you exactly what I want that consequence to look like. Because I know what you're capable of, Jinho, and I know what he deserves, but there's a difference between justice and becoming the very thing you've spent your whole life trying to shield me from." For the first time since he'd walked into the room, something like a genuine, small smile touched the corner of Jinho's mouth. "You always did have better instincts than my own advisors." "That's because your advisors are all terrified of you," Maya said dryly. "I'm not." "No," Jinho agreed softly, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "You never have been." We're at the halfway point of this story, and things are about to take a turn nobody's expecting, because Maya has plans of her own, and they're not what you think. Before we continue, if this story is hitting different, drop a comment telling me what you think Jinho should do to Derek. I want to see your predictions before the reveal. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We've got even more stories like this one dropping every week. Now, let's head to that warehouse, because Derek's about to meet the man whose wife he shoved to the ground. The warehouse on Delacroix sat at the edge of the industrial district, the kind of building that looked abandoned to anyone driving past, but was, in reality, meticulously maintained for exactly this kind of purpose. Derek had been sitting in a chair in the center of a mostly empty room for what felt like hours, though it had probably only been 45 minutes. His wrists zip-tied to the arms of the chair, sweat soaking through his shirt, despite the cold concrete around him. He'd tried talking to the two men guarding the door. They hadn't responded. Not once. He'd tried crying, which felt humiliating even as he did it, some desperate animal part of his brain hoping it might generate sympathy. Nothing. When the door finally opened, Derek's entire body flinched. Kang Jinho walked in alone, though Derek could see the shapes of at least 4 men positioned just outside the doorway, silent shadows that made clear Jinho didn't need protection in this room. He simply chose to enter it by himself, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd brought an army. He was younger than Derek expected. Mid-30s, maybe, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than Derek's entire apartment building. His face was calm, almost gentle-looking, except for his eyes, dark, still, and utterly without warmth. Jinho pulled a chair from against the wall, positioned it a few feet in front of Derek, and sat down slowly, crossing one leg over the other, studying Derek with the detached curiosity of a man examining an insect under glass. "Derek Coleman," he said finally, his English precise, barely accented. "I've heard a great deal about you today." Derek's throat had gone completely dry. "Look, sir, Mr. Choi, I swear to you, I never meant for any of this to happen. It was a stupid argument. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly. I would never intentionally hurt a pregnant woman. Stop." Jinho's voice wasn't raised, but the single word landed with enough weight that Derek's mouth snapped shut immediately. "I don't want your excuses. I want you to understand something very clearly, and I need you to listen without interrupting, because what I say in the next few minutes will determine whether you leave this room alive." Derek's whole body went cold. He nodded frantically, not trusting his voice. "My wife," Jinho continued, "carries our first child, 3 months along. Do you understand what that means to a man like me? I have built an empire, Mr. Coleman. I have more resources, more power, more reach than you could comprehend if I spent the next hour explaining it to you. And none of it, not $1, not one piece of territory, not 1 ounce of the influence I've spent my entire adult life accumulating, means anything to me compared to the safety of my wife and my child." He leaned forward slightly. "So when I received a phone call today informing me that a man who used to know her put his hands on her, pushed her to the ground while she is carrying my child, I want you to understand that every instinct in my body told me to have you eliminated within the hour. Quietly. Permanently. No trace." Derek was shaking now, tears streaming freely down his face, all pretense of composure gone. "Please, please, I have a mother, please, I'm begging you." I said, "Don't interrupt." Jinho's voice remained level, but something in his eyes flickered, cold and sharp. Derek went silent instantly, choking back a sob. "Only reason you are still breathing," Jinho continued, "is because my wife asked me not to kill you. She believes, and I am inclined, against every instinct I have, to trust her judgment on this, that death would be a mercy for a man like you, that the appropriate consequence for someone as small and pathetic as you is not a bullet. It's to watch for the rest of your miserable life, as everything you could have had slips permanently out of reach while knowing exactly why." Derek's breath caught, confusion cutting briefly through his terror. I don't understand." "You will." Jinho stood, straightening his jacket, his composure fully restored now, the brief flash of raw fury from earlier folded back beneath the surface. "Here is what happens now. Tomorrow morning, you will wake up and discover that you have been formally and permanently banned from every establishment, every business, every opportunity that intersects, even distantly with any part of my network, which, Mr. Coleman, is considerably larger than you understand. No job, no apartment lease, no loan. Doors that were already barely open to you will close entirely, and they will stay closed, not through violence, through simple, quiet influence. You will not be able to trace it back to me because there will be nothing to trace. It will simply look like your life continuing on the exact trajectory it was already on before today, except now, every possible path upward will be permanently blocked." That's not," Derek's voice was barely a whisper. "You can't do that. That's not even, I can, and I will, and there is nothing you can do about it," Jinho said calmly. You will also make a public statement, recorded, witnessed, notarized, taking full responsibility for what you did to Maya today. This statement will exist permanently, in the hands of people who will use it against you the moment you attempt to cause her, or our child, any further trouble. If you ever come near my wife again, ever, for any reason, in any capacity, the mercy she asked me to extend today will expire instantly. Do you understand me? Derek nodded desperately, tears and snot mixing on his face, his entire body trembling. Jinho said quietly. I need to hear you say that you understand. I understand, Derek choked out. I understand, I swear, I'll never come near her again, I swear on my life, good. Jinho turned toward the door, then paused, looking back over his shoulder at Derek one final time, his expression unreadable. For what it's worth, Mr. Coleman, Maya spoke very little about you before today. In the 2 years I've known her, your name came up perhaps twice. She had already erased you from her life so completely that you were barely a memory to her. You didn't just fail to hold on to her. You failed to even remain relevant enough to hate. He walked out, leaving Derek alone in the chair, sobbing, the weight of what he just heard settling over him like a physical thing. Now, before we get to the ending, and trust me, it is not what you expect, I want to remind you that stories like this one take real time and effort to bring to life. If you're enjoying it, the biggest thing you can do to support this channel is hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. It genuinely helps more than you know. All right, let's find out what happens to Derek in the weeks that follow, because this story isn't over yet. Derek was released from the warehouse an hour later, driven, not thrown out, driven, in one of the same black SUVs, back to his apartment, though the courtesy of it felt more chilling than any violence could have. Nobody said a word to him the entire ride. When the car stopped outside his building, one of the men simply looked at him and said, "Remember what Mr. Choi told you," before the door closed and the SUV pulled away into traffic. Derek sat on his couch that night without turning on a single light, replaying the last 24 hours over and over in his head, trying to understand how a stupid diner argument had spiraled into what felt like the end of his entire life. He told himself it was an exaggeration. He told himself that men like Jinho made threats. Sure, powerful men always did. But surely it was mostly bluster. Surely by next week things would go back to normal. Surely. The first sign came 2 days later when he showed up for his shift at the warehouse job he'd been working for the past 8 months, only to be told, apologetically but firmly, that his position had been eliminated. No explanation. No severance beyond what was legally required. The manager wouldn't meet his eyes. Derek told himself it was a coincidence. The second sign came 4 days after that, when his landlord, a man he'd never had a single problem with in 2 years of renting, informed him that his lease would not be renewed at the end of the month, effective immediately, and that he had 30 days to vacate. Why? Derek had demanded, genuine confusion in his voice, though a cold pit of dread was already forming in his stomach. I've never missed a payment, I've never caused any problems. I'm sorry, the landlord said, and Derek could actually see, the discomfort on the man's face, the sense that he was following an instruction he didn't fully understand but knew better than to question. It's just the decision's been made. I really am sorry. By the end of the second week, Derek had applied to 11 different jobs across 3 different industries. Jobs he was more than qualified for. Jobs where he'd sailed through initial interviews with genuine enthusiasm from hearing managers, only to receive polite rejection emails within 24 hours of each interview, every single time, with vague language about not moving forward, that told him absolutely nothing except that something, somewhere, was working against him with terrifying precision. He tried calling old contacts. Friends from his old restaurant industry days, acquaintances who owed him favors, distant family connections who might know of opportunities. Every single conversation ended the same way, a strange hesitation in their voice, a sudden unavailability, an excuse that didn't quite make sense. Derek finally understood, with a crushing, suffocating clarity, that Jinho hadn't been bluffing at all. He moved out of his apartment 3 weeks later, into a cheap motel room on the edge of the city, his savings dwindling fast with no income to replace what he was spending. He spent his nights staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying that moment in the diner over and over, the shove, the fall, the look on Maya's face, wondering if there was any version of that day where he'd made a different choice, where his pride and his bitterness hadn't cost him everything. There wasn't. He knew that now. Every path led back to the same singular truth. He had done this to himself. 2 months after the diner, Derek was working, if it could be called that, doing manual labor for a moving company. One of the only jobs left that didn't seem to fall within whatever invisible network Jinho commanded. Though Derek suspected even this was allowed to continue purely so he'd have just enough to survive, never enough to rebuild. He was hauling boxes down a narrow apartment stairwell when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Don't come looking for information about her. Don't ask around. Don't try to explain yourself to mutual friends. Every attempt you make to insert yourself back into her life, in any way, no matter how small, will be noticed. You have been given a second chance most men in your position never receive. Do not waste it by testing how far that mercy extends. Derek stared at the message for a long time, his hands shaking, before he deleted it and sat down on the stairs, his head in his hands. He never tried to contact Maya again. Not once. Word occasionally drifted to him through old mutual acquaintances. Maya had given birth to a healthy baby girl. Maya and her husband had been seen at some high-profile charity gala, photographed from a distance, her face radiant and untroubled. Maya's life had simply continued on, unbothered, unburdened by what had happened in that diner, while Derek's life had contracted into something small and grinding and permanently limited. That was the reckoning Jinho had promised. Not a bullet. Not a body never found. Something slower, and in its own way far crueler, the simple, permanent removal of every opportunity Derek might have had to become anything more than what he already was. 6 months after the diner, Maya sat in the nursery of their home, rocking her daughter to sleep in the soft glow of a nightlight, Jinho leaning in the doorway watching them both with an expression of quiet, overwhelming love that still, even now, sometimes caught her off guard. "You never asked me if I regretted it," Jinho said quietly, stepping into the room, crouching beside the rocking chair. "Letting him live." Maya looked up at him, her daughter's tiny fist curled around her finger. "Do you?" Jinho was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously the way he considered everything. "No," he finally said. "You were right. Some men don't need to be destroyed all at once. They need to watch slowly as every door closes, understanding exactly why, understanding that they did this to themselves. That's a longer punishment than any bullet could deliver." "I didn't do it for cruelty," Maya said softly. "I did it because I refuse to let a man like Derek turn you into someone I don't recognize. I've spent my whole life building something out of nothing. I wasn't going to let his ugliness be the thing that finally broke something in you, in us, that we couldn't fix." Jinho reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair back from Maya's face, the same gesture he'd made in the hospital room months earlier, though the fear that had accompanied it then was long gone now, replaced by something steadier, deeper. "You saved him in a way," Jinho murmured. "And you saved me too, from becoming the version of myself I've spent years trying not to be." Maya smiled softly, looking back down at their daughter, sleeping peacefully now, entirely unaware of the storm that had nearly swept through her family's life before she'd even taken her first breath. "We're going to be okay," Maya said quietly, more to herself than to Jinho. "All 3 of us." "3 of us," Jinho agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Maya's head, then to their daughters. The 3 of them wrapped in the quiet, hard-won piece of a life Maya had built twice now, once from nothing, and once from the wreckage of a man who'd never understood what he'd truly lost the moment he let her walk away the first time. Derek Coleman, wherever he was that night, would never know peace like that again. Not because anyone had taken it from him with violence, but because he had spent every version of his life failing to build it for himself. And when the one moment came where his bitterness could have simply stayed silent, he chose, instead, to reach out and shove away the only thing standing between him and the consequences of every choice he'd ever made. Some men learn that lesson early enough to change. Derek learned it far too late, in a diner booth, 3 feet from a woman he never should have touched, married to a man whose mercy would turn out to be a heavier sentence than any prison ever could. And that's the end of our story tonight. If you enjoyed this one, you know exactly what to do. Smash that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite part, and if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because trust me, we've got plenty more where this came from. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I truly appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves.